Welcome everyone to the Microsoft 365 Chats and TAR Oh My webinar. My name's Rob Lakowski, VP of Sales with ESI Analyst. And boy, are we in for a treat today as we cover three pertinent topics in one session. So 3 short stories, which is great for my short attention span. So a big shout out and thanks to the Masters Conference who's hosting this today, as well as our sponsors, BlueStar and ESI Analyst. And a special thanks to our 3 esteemed panelists. Sarah Thompson, Chief Product Officer from BlueStar, Alicia Hawley, Discovery Counsel and Chair of EDiscovery and Litigation at Taft, and Rick Clark, one of the founders of the Masters Conference and a founder and VP of Client Services at ESI Analyst. So here's the format today. Sarah's going to kick us off with everything you wanted to know about Microsoft 365, but were afraid to ask. And that will lead us into a collaborative session with the other panelists on this topic. And then we'll field a few questions from the audience. So regarding questions, if you have a question you want to submit at any point in time, do that via the Q&A icon down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So it's right next to the chat icon, but don't use the chat, use the Q&A. And time permitting, we'll get to those questions. Right after Sarah's part, we're going to roll into Alicia Hawley's part on the use of technology-assisted review. Is it really that simple? Alicia has some very relevant recent case experiences that are going to enlighten us for sure. And we'll follow the same format with the collaboration and then the questions from the audience. And then last but not least will be Rick Clark. Rick will cover communications in the post-pandemic era, how our new habits of communicating will impact discovery. So Rick's going to talk about Slack and Teams and GroupMe and this onslaught of corporate chat vehicles that are impacting discovery as we speak. And after we field questions specific to Rick's part, we'll open it up once again to the audience, and you can ask questions of each of the panelists or on any topic you want. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Thompson, Chief Product Officer of BlueStar. And Sarah, I probably fall into that camp of being afraid to ask the question because it might be a dumb question with regards to Microsoft 365. But I will say that I learned more than I've ever known about the topic in 10 minutes talking to you yesterday. So you are now my de facto expert. And I know that you have tremendous experience with it, maybe since the onset of Microsoft 365. I know BlueStar is a Microsoft partner. What do we need to know?
Well, thanks so much, Rob. And I want to say thanks to the Masters Conference for having me speak on this panel with my esteemed colleagues. I'm Sarah Thompson. I'm Chief Product Officer for BlueStar Case Solutions. And we handle and consult on Microsoft 365 eDiscovery on a daily basis. And so we're really in the weeds. I personally have had a lot of experience with the product starting about 5 years ago when I led the first software integration into the eDiscovery platform, legal hold preservation capabilities. And so from an API, a PowerShell, a scripting standpoint, to the actual, how do you use it on a daily basis point of view, that's where our experience comes from. I've been in the legal tech industry for over 15 years from the software side, working a lot of the review, collection, and preservation platforms you're probably familiar with. So I'm going to take this topic and I'm going to really approach it from a technical point of view. We've had a lot of questions come in and we're going to kind of field them as we go through. So I'm just going to start by quickly introducing you to BlueStar. BlueStar is the company that I'm with, and we do, like I mentioned, a lot of consulting for 365. So if you do have any questions, feel free to contact us, or you can find me on LinkedIn for any questions. We are a full service eDiscovery shop that is located in across the country, in Chicago, LA, Austin, and New York. So I'm going to go ahead and get started now. Let's talk about why is 365 one of the top considerations for 2021 in our industry. And that's because, well, a lot of people are using it. Over 680,000 corporations in the United States utilize Office 365, or now it's known as Microsoft 365. And so it's going to be something that in any aspect of our profession, you're probably going to encounter at some point. And it's important to know what can it do, what doesn't it do, so that you can understand how you can best leverage that capability. So these 650,000 companies that have this Office 365, one of the nice things about it is that there's this built-in e-discovery capabilities. And so you can go from anywhere, right from the beginning of the EDRM process all the way to the end. So from legal hold notification and classification all the way to, production, not trial presentation, but, production. So this is a really groundbreaking thing that Microsoft's presented to our community, to have that built-in functionality. And there's a lot of great benefits to having that functionality. And mainly it's that, if you are preserving data and performing the e-discovery before the data is actually moved to another location, copied, collected, etc. It really does allow you to do a few things. One, you're really reducing your cost here. You're leveraging your existing Microsoft licensing, and you're able to, perform investigations, place preservation holds without any extra costs. But it also lowers your risk. The risk, that you have when you actually collect to preserve, when you are creating copies of data that is, then stored on at another location for a certain period of time. And that data is generally not subject to your retention policy. So as we've seen in the past in several notable matters, this can be something that can really get us in trouble later down the line. And also you have business continuity. So when you place these holds or utilize this functionality in Microsoft, you're the custodian, the person that you're placing on hold, any person that is involved in this matter, they're not going to be bothered by hey, I need to take over your computer and collect your email. It's going to be all done in the background, with or without their knowledge. So a lot of really great benefits, and this is why we are always promoting the use of Microsoft 365's e-discovery capabilities. So let's talk about the questions that most commonly come up. And so we had quite a few questions come in prior to the presentation. Just was looking at a little question there, a little call out to RGB. But let's start off with this question we had that comes in very often. It's on licensing. So I think at this point, a lot of people have kind of figured out what licenses apply and what features are available in Microsoft. But let's kind of just do a quick overview. You basically have, level 1 licenses, level 3 licenses, and level 5 licenses. So generally with an enterprise, it'll be an E1, E3, and E5. And those are your general levels of licensing for Microsoft. Now, with the E1 license, you don't have any e-discovery capabilities. It all starts in the E3. So when you go to the E3 license, that's when you have the capability to preserve data in place, which is a really awesome feature, as well as performing search and investigation and being able to export that data when you need it. When you move up to the E5 license, you have the full gamut of features and functionality, all the way from legal hold notification, as I mentioned before, to production. And so you're able to even process data within the platform, review it, all within the Microsoft 365. And some may think, well, we had Stacey Abrams mention yesterday during the keynote at Legal Tech, how we are in a very risk-averse industry, and that here we are, we have a platform that's coming out and saying, hey, we know how to do review and processing. And so there may be some mistrust there, but this platform was actually created by industry experts, and I have complete confidence in the fact that the standards that we need to uphold are actually upheld in this platform. So that's kind of question licensing. It's in general you need an E3. The custodians that you have need an E1 or above. But if you want to do review, every one of your custodians would need to have an E5. So that tends to be a little bit expensive for corporations. And so what we're seeing right now is that most people are sticking at that E3 level. So just being able to preserve data and search it and export it in Microsoft. And they're not quite going to that E5 license, which is a challenge I think that Microsoft is trying to address. Obviously, they want people to be using all the great functionality in their platform. We did have a question from the audience that says, if you could improve Microsoft 365 eDiscovery, what features would you like to see improved? RBG forever. So I would say that what I would like to see improved in Microsoft's platform is really the access to the processing and review capabilities within the platform. And so if we could just solve that licensing issue, then I think that would be a really great thing. And that's, we're talking to you, Microsoft. So let's go on to our next kind of topic, which is preservation. So, you know, questions come up all the time. So you can preserve data in Office 365. Well, what should I preserve? Should I do one hold for everything? Should I have multiple holds that are organized by matter? Should I be applying keyword filters to my holds or date range? All these great questions. So, you know, what we really recommend is that when you're preserving data, you organize it by matter so that when the matter is closed, it is easy to just remove that hold. And so you're not having to manage, you know, what matters is this person on, you close the matter, you release the custodians, they're gone from the matter, but they may still be on other matters. So we definitely recommend to be, you know, performing holds in that way. And we definitely recommend using date range searches. So if you have a date range, utilize it so that you're not preserving everything, because once you apply a preservation hold, your retention policy will no longer apply. That means the data will just be retained forever. So that's not wonderful, and that's risky. So definitely apply a date limit. And so that's really what I would recommend, by case and by date range per custodian. Another question we get a lot is, you know, it really has to do a lot with our data privacy, you know, that we're seeing, the regulations that we're seeing globally, like GDPR and CCPA and et cetera, et cetera. You know, you can't always preserve data. So if you're in a company that, you know, is multinational, you may want to limit the ability to preserve data in the EU, for example. So is there a way to do it? Yes, there is a way to do it. With an E5 license, you know, coming up on their roadmap, they're going to be integrating this into the functionality in Microsoft, or so rumor has it. And that should be happening sometime in the near future. Now, what about if you don't have E5, which most people don't? What do? Well, there are a few ways you can do it, and this can be attacked. This problem can be attacked by utilizing PowerShell scripts and what we call the Graph API. So detecting someone's region using the Graph API, and then utilizing PowerShell scripts to make that happen. So kind of technical as an answer, but if you need to have more information on that, just let me know. Okay, so let's see what else we have. What are the most common questions? So searching, this is a lot. Okay, so it's really tough to know, you know, you really want to have that confidence to know that when you are placing that preservation hold, that your keywords are getting what you need, right? You want to have what you need, but you don't want to have, you certainly want to like pay respects to proportionality. So let's talk about what's actually searched. So when I'm performing an eDiscovery search, you know, our email attachments searched. They most certainly are. Our OneNote attachments, embedded files searched? No, they are not. Does Microsoft search compressed zip files? Yes, they do. Do they search encryption files? Yes and no. So encrypted files within Microsoft 365, I think, is going to be becoming more and more of an issue, since, you know, security is such a, you know, top of mind these days. So when Microsoft searches encrypted files, it's only for email. So many think that it's for OneDrive documents and SharePoint documents as well, but those files, if they are encrypted, they are not searchable. So that's a really important thing to know. You can decrypt these files on export utilizing something like a PowerShell script, and there's a few other methods to do that. But I think it's really important with searching to know exactly what it is and is not getting in order for you to perform the best types of searches that'll get you what you want. Okay. I'm just going to all right, so export. Do I need to export unindexed items? So again, here we are with proportionality. Not everything's indexed in Office 365, sorry, Microsoft 365, such as your encrypted items that we just spoke about. And so should I export them? You most certainly should, because that is the only way you're going to get those protected documents. They may be key pieces of evidence, so you have to use your judgment on that, but we definitely recommend that you do exactly that. So finally, let's talk about Teams. Teams is something that's top of mind for most people these days. In-house counsel that is actually executing. Most corporations have actually moved to Teams, and so we're getting a lot. How do I work with Teams in Microsoft 365? And Rick's going to talk more about this later. But I think it's really interesting to know, like, how to understand how things are organized. And so with Microsoft 365, you are going to have documents that are organized both in SharePoint, and then you're going to have your messaging that's going to be in your mailbox. So the Outlook mailbox for the team is going to contain your IM message, and your documents will be in a separate SharePoint site. So when you're searching for Teams, you're actually going to, when you end up exporting data, you're going to have like SharePoint loose files as well as a PST for your team. And so it's really kind of an interesting thing. And, one of the things that is a best practice, of course, is, again, don't use keyword searching here, in my opinion, because when I search for a keyword in Teams, what I'm going to find, I will get a hit, but it's going to be just in that particular post. And so it will not be embedded into a conversation that will enable me to kind of make any sense of the, value of this information. All right. And so how are we for time?
I think you're just about out, but it's awesome because you've gotten some great questions. And by the way, I apologize if we don't get to all the questions on the webinar, but we absolutely will address them afterwards. And if you have a question, you'll get a personal email with the answer. So Sarah, that was awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. And so now we're going to transition to Alicia Hawley, Discovery Counsel and Chair of EDiscovery and Litigation at Taft. Technology assisted review, is it really that simple? And Alicia, I've always been a big proponent of technology assisted review and continuous active learning, probably because of service providers that I've worked with in the past. But the big challenge has always been finding the attorney or the partner on the case that will embrace it. And it sounds like you've more than just embraced it.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I think that is a big challenge. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how to overcome that issue, because that's really the first hurdle in getting TAR to become part of the mainstream, if you will. So to introduce myself really quickly, Alicia Hawley, I chair the eDiscovery and Litigation Services practice group at Taft, Stettinius and Hollister. I have been practicing for about 20 years. I started off doing discovery as a paralegal in a warehouse under a car dealership, going through old files, the old war stories. That was my first case 20 some years ago. And I've watched discovery evolve from paper and hard copy documents into where we are now. Quite frankly, I thought probably 7 to 10 years ago that technology assisted review was already going to be a thing. So we're kind of behind by about a decade as to where I think a lot of us thought we would be. And I think one of the reasons for that is sort of what you described, Rob, which is people are a little bit resistant to technology and to change. So I'm going to share a slide here, PowerPoint. Hopefully you guys can see this. Here we go from the beginning. Okay. So to address that question, the first question that I have that I wanted to answer is, what is technology assisted review and how does it work? So a lot of times case teams and attorneys and clients hear technology assisted review. They immediately affiliate that with artificial intelligence, and then they get freaked out. Lawyers are traditionally pretty resistant to technology, just generally speaking. And I think there's a misconception that not only is it a little bit scary because it's unknown, but that there are like robots involved. And artificial intelligence means the computer is doing all this work and it's making all these decisions and I've lost control now. And that's not really the case. So technology assisted review as we know it today is TAR 2.0. That's sort of the version that we are. And that's also referred to frequently as continuous active learning. So that's kind of where we are right now. And TAR 2.0 is a prioritization and efficiency tool. That's it. The job of TAR is to make your job as a reviewer, as an attorney, as the case team easier and more efficient. Its job is not to do all of the work for you. It's just to make the work that you're doing easier. So all it's doing is the computer program is just using algorithms that are based off of the coding decisions that the people are making. So usually it's the attorney review team. They're making coding decisions and the computer program takes algorithms and looks at those decisions and basically categorizes documents in a way that's going to make the review more efficient. It's super straightforward. There are no decisions that are being made by the computer. You still have complete control as the reviewer over what is that's produced. All of that is still human control. So on a little more granular level as to how it works is basically you put all of your documents into a review project. All the documents that you want to be reviewing are going into a review project. And then you can either use a seed set to train. You can take a random sample of those documents that you put into the review and review those first, or you can just sort of turn loose in the project. And once you start coding, the computer behind the scenes, without you even knowing it, is assigning responsiveness scores to all of the documents in the project. So when you first start out and you start coding, it's going to see documents that are similar to the ones that you have tagged as responsive, and it's going to give those a relatively high responsiveness score. And then it's going to take documents that you're coding as not responsive, and similar documents to those are going to get a pretty low responsiveness score. And it's all behind the scenes, and it's just basically categorizing the documents. And it's saying, okay, these are similar to the ones that you said were responsive, so those have a higher likelihood of responsiveness. A document, because it's continuous active learning, a document's score can change throughout the course and the lifespan of the review. And so that's what TAR 2.0 is, and is a little bit different than what we used to have, which is the computer continues to learn with every coding change that you make. So as the reviewers make changes, the system gets smarter. And you might have a document with a really high score early on that, based on coding decisions to similar documents, starts to drop its score a little bit over time. And that's because the system's getting smarter and it's learning as you go. So the real question is, what do we do with this information? It's scoring these documents, it's giving them a responsiveness score, it's doing all this work behind the scenes based on all of the decisions that you're making. What do we do with that information? And the answer is, there are a few things that you can do. And I think that TAR is underutilized and under-leveraged because people don't always think through all of the ways that you can maybe use it. So the really straightforward way is that you can use it to help organize your actual document review. So the way that sort of a standard TAR protocol would work is the documents get reorganized based on the responsiveness scores that are assigned. So you continue to keep reviewing, and as you're reviewing, the data gets organized, pushing the likely responsive documents to the front, and the likely to be not responsive documents towards the end of the queue. So it's just pushing to the front the documents that you want to see. It's pushing those to the front of the review. So that's one way. That's the pretty obvious way to use the scores, is to help organize your review. Another way that you can use the scores, and I see this happen a lot, is the parties can agree that you will do some sort of either randomized sampling of your set, or you'll do a seed set and you'll plug that into TAR, and then you'll produce all of the documents that have a responsiveness score assigned by the technology above a certain number. Or that you'll only review documents that have a responsiveness score within a certain range. So you can use that metric to determine how you're actually going to approach your review in production, or your meet and confers and your negotiations with the other party. Another way that you can use TAR is to help isolate your key documents. And that could be either documents that are in your own data set and your client's data set, or documents that are produced to you. So you can put that data into the active learning or into your TAR project, and you can use those scores and those categorizations to figure out what documents you need to be looking at. What are the key documents? What is the crux of my case? What do I need to see right away that's really important to our narrative? And then the last way, and this is a way that I actually use it pretty frequently, even if I'm not using TAR as part of the review process or the review protocol, I will use TAR to QC the work that is being done by the review team. So you can run, because it's happening behind the scenes, you can run TAR like as a shadow and nobody even knows it's happening. So it's just kind of running, it's categorizing the documents, it's giving them scores, nobody even knows it's there. And then you can use those scores to QC the work that is being done by the team. So you can take all the not responsive documents that have a really high responsiveness score and put somebody to review those and lay another set of eyes on them. Or likewise, all the responsive documents that have a low responsiveness score, you can look at those and make sure those were actually reviewed and tagged correctly. So I use it a lot. I use it almost all the time in my projects for QC purposes, even if we're not using it as part of our workflow. All right, question number. This is a question that someone submitted in advance, and I think it's a super great question, which is, can TAR be used effectively in small cases? And the follow-up question to that was, how small is too small? And I think that's really good, a really good question, because a lot of the times we think of technology-assisted review for these big, massive cases, and we're trying to get a handle on all the data, and it's really overwhelming, and how do we approach it? But the answer is yes, you can use it for small cases. You can use it for any size case. And the reason for that is because you can use it not only just to streamline your review and organize and categorize the documents, but you can use it for some of these other purposes. So you can use it to find your key documents, to run QC, to do other things that you might need this score for. Is something too small? I do think at some point there might be like diminishing returns on it, right? If you've got 500 documents, you might as well just review all of those, because that's not that many documents, and you probably could get through the human review of that, in 4 or 5, 6 hours, depending on how complicated it is. So if it's 600 or 500 or 600 documents, you might not need to use TAR for that. Although, like I said, you could still use that for other purposes. You could still use it as like a check, as a QC, to maybe help organize the data in some way. All right, let's see here. Question 3. So this was another question that we got in advance, and this is such a good question. And the question is, how does TAR work with emojis? Obviously, and Rick is going to talk about, some of the development in technology as far as communication goes. And all of us here, I'm sure, being in the industry, know that technology evolves almost daily at this point. And things change so fast that other pieces of technology have to really catch up and stay on top of it. And emojis is one of those things. We communicate using emojis today in a way that we certainly did not, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And so how does TAR work with emojis? quite frankly, the answer to that is, I don't really know. I don't think it does. I think that's something they need to catch up on. I think this is one of those pieces of technology that is rapidly developing, and they're going to have to figure out a way to catch the distinctions in what emojis mean. I mean, certainly the algorithms are able to read some of the underlying characters, but it's not, to my knowledge, evolved enough to read the distinctions in what those characters mean. So it wouldn't be able to distinguish between a happy face, a sad face, a shocked face, all those things that we're trying to communicate with emojis. I don't think TAR has gotten to that point yet. I think I think there's going to be some work to develop it to a place where it can distinguish not only that there is a character that exists, but what that character means. So hopefully we'll see that. I don't know how long it'll take. All right, question 4. Here's the last question that I have to address. So I forgot to say this in my intro, but I represent the city of Chicago and was the attorney who argued and briefed the recent decision in the Livingston versus City of Chicago matter. That was last year. Seems like can't believe it was that long ago, but so I was the attorney involved in that particular decision and in briefing and arguing the TAR issue there. So I wanted to give a sort of a really quick high-level overview on that and talk about why the decision in that case was really important progress for TAR and for technology-assisted review. So in that particular instance, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, so I don't want to sort of belabor the point here, but a little bit of background in that case was that the decision was the result of a motion to compel. The plaintiffs filed a motion to compel against the defendant, and the motion to compel was for compliance with an existing ESI protocol. So the parties had spent a very long time negotiating an ESI protocol. The protocol was pretty extensive. It involved custodians, collection format, date ranges, search terms. It was very extensive, and we'd spent a long time negotiating it. And search terms was part of that. So we negotiated search terms. So we were on a meet and confer with plaintiffs and mentioned that we were going to be using active learning. We use relativity. We were going to use active learning in order to help review the documents. And they didn't like that. And so they took it to the judge. And we did an oral argument on it. And then we briefed it based on the oral argument. But the issues in this case were that the plaintiff argued that if we were allowed to use TAR, that we had to apply it to the original data set pre-search term application. So we couldn't apply it to the post-cold data. We had to apply it to the original data set. And that was their first argument. And their second argument was, and if they're allowed to use TAR, they have to use a protocol, a separate protocol that is put in place that dictates how the review is going to be done, what the QC is, what the validation measures are going to be, and some of those really detailed technical aspects of it. And we said, we don't think that we have to do that. We think that we can use TAR after search terms have been applied, and we don't think that we have to have an agreed upon protocol. And ultimately the court agreed with us and said, basically reaffirmed Sedona Principle 6, which says that the responding party is best situated to know how to review and produce the data that is going to meet their obligations under the federal rules, as far as what is responsive, determining the best approach for the review itself. And so that was the first part, is they don't get to inject themselves into the situation and create a protocol or dictate some type of protocol that has to be used. And then the second part of the decision, which I think is almost a bigger part of it, is that TAR can be used after the application of search terms. So you don't have to use it on a pre-called data set. You can use it after search terms have been applied, and use it that way. So those obviously were really, that was good. I was happy with the decision. But I think that this was a really important decision because it shows that courts are paying a little bit more attention to TAR and are getting involved in some of the nuances of it and how it can be applied, how it can be used in an efficient manner. The argument that I kept making was that this is an efficiency tool. It's a prioritization tool. Its purpose is not to pick and choose what we actually review. It's just to make the review more efficient and more effective. And that's really what it is. And I think that this decision helps to conquer some of those misconceptions about what it does do and what it doesn't do. So that was all. Oh, we had a comment. Thanks for the advocacy of, yeah, you're welcome. That was a good, I was happy with that case. I think it's good for the industry. So I was pleased with it.
I think that case is awesome because you lived it. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And so thank you for that, Alicia. That was awesome. You know, a couple of quick questions that maybe you can answer and make sure we get the answers to everybody. Just when you are using TAR, when do you stop? You know, and that might be too long of an answer to go over right now in light of our timing. I think it's cool that you impressed upon us that you can use TAR and still decide to review everything in the universe. Yep. You know, there's nothing that precludes you from doing that and still, you know, leverage the advantages to maybe the most relevant material bubbling to the top. Yeah. So it's great. Again, I can't thank you enough. Awesome. And just to reiterate to the audience, we'll get all the questions answered and we'll get those out to you. And now we're going to move on to...
Hey, Rob, do you want me to answer that question or do we want to punt it to the end? Because I can give a really brief answer to that question if you want me to.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Because I think it's a super important question, actually, and I'm sure people have that same question. When do you stop? And I think the answer varies a little bit on the case that you're working on and what the variables are for each individual case. But you can use the metrics to figure out, you know, what is the breaking point? There's usually a breaking point, right? So that breaking point might be a responsiveness score of 60, or it might be a responsiveness score of 80. It just depends on the case, but you can look at that and figure out, okay, all of the responsive documents are above 60. So we don't have any documents above 60 that haven't been reviewed. So let's stop. Let's take a look now at the documents that haven't been reviewed. Let's run targeted QC. Let's run an illusion test that's going to do random sampling. Let's figure out if there are more documents that need to be reviewed there or if we're done. And that number can shift from case to case. But once you decide you're at a good stopping point, you're not really done. You still need to go in and look at if there is unreviewed data. You need to do a diligent and thorough job of making sure that data is not responsive and doesn't need to be reviewed.
Very cool. Thank you. All right. So we're going to move on now to Rick Clark. Again, to reiterate, Rick's actually one of the founders of the Masters Conference. He's also one of the founders of ESI Analyst and VP of Client Services. And Rick's going to cover how our new habits of communicating will impact discovery. So Rick, it seems like the part you're going to cover, if there was an exhibit floor at Legal Tech this year, you might have seen your topic as one of the quote next big things unquote, sort of like TAR was 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know that this new wave of corporate chats and text messages and emerging data types, however, is going to be a decade behind, like Alicia alluded to. So how is this going to impact us?
Well, trillions, Rob. It's going to impact us by the trillions. No, so there's, and I'll explain here in a minute, but yeah, really what we're seeing is that all of these new data types are expansive in not only applications, but volumes. So I'm going to share my screen here. So when we look at modern data, and especially after we've all had a year, and we will have certainly a year plus of this pandemic, we find quite a few things. One, when we look at discovery, we kind of look at, traditional email and documents, and is email still here to play? And I would say at 1.9 trillion emails per week, absolutely, yes. So that's for sure. But what we are finding more is that non-email is starting to take over. And there's a few reasons for that. One, when we're in the office, we'll go to the water cooler, break room, we'll have our conversations. We'll go to someone's office and chit chat about a particular issue that we're having. Right now, what we're finding is those conversations are moving to a quick Slack or a quick, Teams chat about a particular item. We might go to a group. We might just have a quick impromptu conference room meeting and talk through something on a channel, or set up a Zoom meeting and have conversations that way. And so what we're finding is that the non-email items are becoming very important to discovery. And we also might even look at Slack as an example. 1.5 billion messages sent weekly. Now, out of the 909, that's a small number, but that's still quite significant when organizations are, compounding their challenges by creating more and more messages. The next thing we might see is some very peripheral social media type things that might get introduced to litigation. Today's conversation, though, we're really going to focus in on the data and litigation from a corporate perspective, and what do we see there. So we're all very familiar, if we look to the far right of this slide, corporate applications, backups are, again, emails, loose files. We're finding a bit of an infusement of user activity depending on the case type. So like IP theft, we want to see if they took something on the way out, like plugged in a thumb drive, saved something to that thumb drive. URLs, websites visited, that type of activity can be stored on the network, or in the middle we see on their personal computers, their laptops. So all of these devices that are typically corporate owned will be storing a lot of that information. Now we're seeing with BYOD, phones themselves being introduced to discovery and evidence. Now, sometimes they are just the vehicle to get Slack messages across to the teams, but we're finding that chat applications like WhatsApp, WeChat, Viber, text messages, all of that is now starting to become more and more important. Now, when we look at our industry as a whole, we see our current e-discovery workflow. And I'm going to pause, kind of take a moment here, because everything I'll talk about downstream is a bit impacted by looking at this model. So first, we have all of our disparate data. Now, this is everything I just mentioned. And what we're seeing in the industry is we'll extract out and create documents. We'll create a big, long RSMF, or we'll create individual items per message. So short messages back and forth are getting their own document. That might then get processed and filtered at that document level, loaded into a document review platform, and then you have your workflows around managed review and reviewing that information. So keep that in mind as I start to look at the way this data starts to come out of these systems. So what are the main categories of communication? One, we just talked about corporate email. So absolutely, that's still the first and foremost. But again, the channel-based collaboration tools, they not only are where people are migrating their conversations, but we're finding integrated apps like HubSpot and Jira and Confluence are all sending those messages about something being completed to the collaboration system. We're also finding there's personal conversations that go on, even in among your Slack and Teams and corporate chat environments. Those are one-on-one versus a channel-based conversation with a group. And then, of course, as I mentioned, BYOD. So looking at the last one, this is what we're typically seeing, and that is you have a collection. Typically, Celebrite will be used to go out, collect data from that device. But what does that data look like? It could be an SMS tab. It could be a call logs tab, an MMS tab with all the attachment links, geolocation, chats, those third-party applications. I don't know who all out there might be just getting these as what you need to review. We see sometimes these are all getting converted again to those individual documents and loaded. RSMF, different types of ways that's managed. And that seems to be okay for some legal teams. When you talk about many phones and proper link analysis among custodians, that's where we hear a lot of conversations and how that needs to be streamlined. Well, let's look at the next one. So JSON, that comes out of your Slack and GroupMe and other communication applications. An example, 1 3 megabyte JSON file seems pretty small. So if we're calculating gigabytes, that's nothing. Well, actually, we're looking more like 50,000 messages and links to about 30 gigabytes of attachments. Compounding that a bit further, 10 gigs of Slack JSON could easily, and it does, equate to well over millions of individual messages and hundreds of gigs of attachments. So this simple application here, where we're so cavalier and just sending messages back and forth, starts to develop quite a bit. And the data behind it's pretty simple. It's a JSON format that contains some pretty good type user types, users, text, the text itself, some other identifiers. And so it looks simple, but if you can imagine, if it's just text like this, it's not going to equate to a lot of gigabytes. It's just a handful of kilobytes or megabytes. GroupMe, same thing. So a lot of organizations are using GroupMe. Looks like this, really nice and pretty and easy to manage. And then you've got the JSON right behind it. So that can also, again, compound. Now, Teams, as Sarah was talking about, is a really nice way to have internal collaboration. But when you export this data, that exports out into a PST. So if you put that PST back in Outlook, you're going to look like it's going to look like individual emails versus that really nice thread that you saw there. The same is going to be true with attachments and things as well. So what we're doing is, from ESI analyst, in my perspective, and a lot of the conversations I have, is we need to look at all of this disparate data and manage all of that disparate data as it is. It's metadata with attachments. Let's use the metadata, do proper link analysis, have those, better ways to review and filter, and then export out into document format, which we all love in our industry. And I've been doing this for 20 years, and I remember getting those CDs of all of those emails and putting it into either iPro or Law and charging $26,000 for that, because it was just we turned them all into documents. And we've gotten a lot better since, but this data we can't do the same thing with. So if there's ever any interest from anyone out there to have a deeper conversation about this, what ESI Analyst does, that's really our goal, is to take modern data and treat it the way that it needs to be treated. So
Rick, sounds good. Can you see the questions, Rick, or do you want me to ask
I
them?
have them hidden so I wouldn't get distracted. So, so what communication app is the most troublesome for ESI Analyst? I would say, as it comes out, most, like I showed those JSON files, they're very clean. That's very clean data. So that's pretty generally easy to manage. The toughest one, and Sarah's here for my rescue on this, is actually coming out of Microsoft, 365 for Teams specifically. It's because they're creating those, we have to create reassociations with thread IDs and really tie all that back together. Fortunately, we've been doing this for a long time, and we've had all of this weird data, from WhatsApp to WeChat, Line coming out of Japan. So we're learning a lot, but I would say for the most part, it's actually pretty.
Did you say line or wine? Sorry, it's
3:50 here, and it is Wine Down Wednesday, but no,
I know. Sorry about that. So, so the next question, how does, and again, that's specific, I'm assuming, to ESI Analyst, how does your tool differ from others? I think you sort of answered that in that ESI Analyst treats it as the data that it is versus trying to convert to documents.
Yeah, the biggest challenge we see, and I'm not here to disparage any other platform out there, is when you take a long string of conversations. Let's say the four of us have been eDiscovery pals for the past 15 years. That's a very long RSMF that lives in that document review platform. Most of it's going to be about how excited we are to go to legal tech, and that's not relevant. So there's high levels of redaction in those types of files, and so ours, we treat every item as an item where you tag it and produce only the items that you would want. But that's probably more of a let's have a conversation afterwards. I can show you what I mean.
Hey, Rick, what are you seeing in terms of like the trends by corporate legal departments and their counsel with regards to knowing they have to deal with this data or getting it thrown out?
So we're finding more and more that the other side is able to argue where this is where the data lives. We take a criminal example. Criminals aren't running around with laptops robbing banks. They've got cell phones on them and things. And so it's really making the right arguments that this data does have a lot of value so they can get over the proportionality challenges. That's, I would say, probably the one that we're seeing more is that this data is getting introduced because they know that there's a lot of value in this data.
And one question that came up before the webinar, just what other data types are up and coming that, because like I'm assuming the question was around, there's like a new corporate chat vehicle that pops up every week. And to the extent that they all use JSON formats or something like that, they might be able to easily all be dealt with, but they might not all use JSON formats. So what are some other kinds of data that might be popping up that could present problems?
In the chat world, it seems to be all pretty standard. I would actually say it's more of like using the registry files, event logs, and this gets very forensics, but those are preserved on networks and workstations about user activity. So saving, like I said, saving something to a hard drive. Also geolocation found on phones. Our phones are quite the tattletale, and we sometimes don't even know it because it's just logging where we just were, and that could be in proximity to a text message. So it's really leveraging data that's available that we normally don't, and those are some of those types.
All right. If there aren't any other questions from Sarah or Alicia, we can open it to general questions about any of the topics. And I've got one actually going back to your part, Sarah. Thank you, Rick, by the way. That was great stuff. And just a reminder, any questions you have, we'll get answers to those. We'll also get you out a recording of the webinar. But Sarah, can you speak to just the processing capability of Microsoft 365 in comparison to the Nuixes of the world, the Vinios of the world? If you could speak to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I kind of alluded to at the beginning of my presentation, the eDiscovery capabilities in Microsoft really came from within our industry. And so the initial core discovery functionality was an acquisition by Microsoft of a company called Equivio, which many of you who've been in the industry for some time probably are familiar with. And so they were kind of one of the first to come out in the industry to do, integrate kind of like auto coding and other things like that. Their processing capabilities were stunning, and they continue to be so. And they really took that team from Equivio and integrated it into Microsoft. And so you'll still see the same people heading up those products, such as, Rocky Messing, who was from Equivio. We have Iram Aras from iConnect, and LexisNexis. And so we have a lot of people that, have been working for a long time in the legal industry on these specific products. Even the developers I worked with when I was at LexisNexis on law and concordance. And so the capabilities of the product are quite standard and they're, very good and solid capabilities. But even if you're not going to use the functionality that is native to Microsoft, you can do things like, there is a partnership between Relativity One and Microsoft, where you can send data directly from Microsoft 365 to Relativity One. And so that's a whole other kettle of fish. Yeah, so quite good processing capabilities. But again, the biggest problem is the E5 license. It means that every custodian requires one. So you have frontline workers that you need to, process their data, then they're going to need an E5 license, which can be quite costly on a volume based level. There are ways around it, but quite frankly, most corporations are just not going that route. They're sticking with their standard, sometimes even collecting to preserve, export. But what we recommend: preserve in place, export when needed, and then process with your other tools such as a Relativity or a Vineo.
Very good, thank you, Alicia. Without, because I know we're supposed to be agnostic here, and without calling out any certain solutions, what can you say about the costs of technology assisted review now? Because it sounds like you use it on a lot of cases, if not every case, maybe for the prioritization of documents, or maybe, as you alluded to, just for the QC on the back end. Is the cost such that you could use it for any or all of those purposes?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So we host Relativity on premises because we are a pretty big firm, and we have, that's part of what my group does, is we're sort of end-to-end service with regard to e-discovery. And so we host Relativity on premises, and all of our cases go into that instance of it. So there's no additional cost for my cases to use any of the technology that exists within Relativity. So for me, it doesn't cost the client more to use active learning. And generally speaking, if you're not paying for the technology itself, it's just going to make it cheaper, because you're going to spend less time on the review. It's going to be more efficient. It's a cost saving measure. I do know that there are vendors, if people are using vendors to host data, there are vendors that charge an additional cost to leverage analytics or technology assisted review. And so there could be a supplemental charge to use it that way. I don't know how that cost would balance out with with the money you're saving because of the efficiency. I'm sure there's a balance there, right? Like, you're saving money because it's more efficient, but you have to pay money to use the tool. So I would suspect that it's a bad business model if it doesn't weigh in favor of saving you money still, because no one would use it. So I've got to imagine that it probably is still going to save people money, even if they have to pay for it through a vendor.
Yeah, understood. Any additional questions from Rick or Sarah?
Yeah, I had one for Alicia. With TAR and the data I was just talking about, certainly short message. You talked a bit about emojis. Have you seen any, or what are some of your thoughts around TAR and short messages, or chats and Slack?
Yeah, I mean, I think it works the same with anything that's got text in it or identifiable information that can be categorized by the algorithms. So the issue with emojis, which certainly would sneak into text messages, is that particular type of information cannot really at this point be tracked and categorized. So with the text itself, I mean, I think it still works the same. It's using dates, it's using phone numbers, it's using recipient information, custodians, and content to develop the algorithm that's going to decide what score to give it. So if the short messaging format, if the text message chain, if the Slack conversation has identifying information and content, which it does, it's going to be able to still use that to make some decisions on responsiveness scores. Great.
Well, we are right at the top of the hour, and I've got to thank the audience for hanging in there all the way to the end. And a special thanks again to Alicia and Sarah and Rick. In fact, Rick has gifts for all the panelists that he'll be sending out shortly after this. But no, your topics were very enlightening. Even after, myself having prepped for this with you, there was a lot I learned, and I really appreciate it. Thanks to the masters and BlueStar ESI analyst. Everybody have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.